I loathe such things as jazz.
I don't belong to any club or group.
Progressive schools.
I don't fish, cook.
I especially loathe vulgar movies.
The sorrows of homosexuals. I don't get drunk, go to church.
Brutes, bores, swimming pools.
I don't go to analysts.
Music in supermarkets.
I don't endorse books, sign books.
Fake thinkers, puffed up poets, Freud, Marx, frauds and sharks.
Vladimir Nabokov was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, even though he hardly had a good word to say about it. You could rely on him to turn his cruel eye and satirical pen on the sacred cows of the day. That's why I love his books so much. But they're difficult. They have moral problems in them, none more so than his best-known book, Lolita, the story of a middle-aged man's erotic obsession with an adolescent girl. Nabokov somehow took our greatest taboo and turned it into something like a love story. But even now, nobody's quite sure what his motives were. Was it a morality tale or the fantasies of a dirty old man? Lolita, published in 1955, tells the story of Humbert Humbert, a European émigré who becomes obsessed with his American landlady's adolescent daughter. Nabokov himself adapted it for the screen in a film starring James Mason, Shelley Winters, and the 14-year-old Sue Lyon. I think there's something you and I need to clear up. You say Nabokov, he said Nabokov, so that's what I'm going to say. But we can all agree, surely, on Lolita. That's just it, we can't. I've mentioned this book, which I love, to friends of mine, and they say, oh, that's that pervy book by that bloke. Wasn't there something a bit funny about him? I want to be able to carry this around in public, read bits out to friends, maybe not take it out at a parents' evening, but feel comfortable with it, and yet I can't. And that's crazy, 50 years after little Lolita first appeared. Like Humbert Humbert, the anti-hero of Lolita, Nabokov was an enigmatic figure, difficult to label or pin down. He was born into the Russian aristocracy in 1899, fled his homeland during the Bolshevik Revolution, and was then chased from Europe by the Nazis to America. He ended his days a guest in a grand international hotel. Written halfway through his career, Lolita was considered scandalous not only for its subject matter, but the way the author treats it. As Humbert Humbert woos Lolita's mother to get closer to Lolita herself, the story enters the realm of farce. Nabokov takes an unmentionable theme and turns it into comedy. Determined to get to the bottom of Nabokov's life and art, I've come to Montreux on the shores of Lake Geneva. It was here Nabokov came, flush with the proceeds of Lolita at the age of 62, to lead the life of a reclusive expatriate.
Besides the obvious virtues of Switzerland as a nation, there are several attractive details. Exquisite postal service, no bothersome demonstrations, no spiteful strikes, alpine butterflies, fabulous sunsets just west of my window, spangling the lake, splitting the crimson sun.
From 1961 until his death, Nabokov lived at the Montreux Palace Hotel, shielded from the outside world by a retinue of hotel staff. Just like his books, Nabokov wasn't easy to get to the bottom of. He could appear aloof, haughty. He liked entertaining here, but on the other hand, what kind of person lives in a hotel?
Why do you live in hotels?
Simplifies postal matters, eliminates the nuisance of private ownership, confirms me in my favorite habit, the habit of freedom.
Nabokov wasn't alone. He lived with his wife Vera. They were intense, interior and private, only occasionally opening doors to let themselves be filmed in staged photo opportunities. Vera was more than Nabokov's wife. She was a close collaborator, editing and typing his manuscripts. Here we are. Wow. Thank you. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
It's amazing to be here in the actual room where Nabokov and his wife spent so many years. And people, fans, pay thousands of pounds to come and stay here just for a few days, hoping that some of that magic will rub off, or perhaps something more mystical. And some of the original stuff is still here. That's his desk. That's his bed. Unpack my few meager possessions. This is a great picture of him working at this very desk. Nabokov wrote several books during these last years in Montreux. Some of them, like Lolita, describe older men lusting after enchanting nymphets, a word he coined himself. I wonder what he kept in here. Probably the index cards of the last book he was working on at the time of his death, the original of Laura. It revisits some of the same dark and disturbing material as his best-known book. A man marrying a woman who reminds him of a much younger love, shades of Lolita there, and very strong sexual material about an obese man who can only have sex with his much younger wife in a grotesque parody of an embrace. So it wasn't just Lolita. There's a kind of conga line of young women shimmering through the pages, particularly the later pages of Nabokov.
3, 34, 31, 42, 43.
Not surprisingly, Nabokov was always quick to deny any personal link between himself and his aroused anti-heroes.
Why did you write Lolita? Why did I write Lolita? Why did I write any of my books, after all? For the sake of the pleasure, for the sake of the difficulty. You see, I have no social purpose, no moral message. I'm not a messenger. I have no general ideas to exploit. I'm not a general. But I like composing riddles. I like finding elegant solutions to my riddles, to those riddles that I have composed myself.
Did Lolita herself, have an original?
As a matter of fact, I don't know little girls very well. When I think about this subject, I don't think I know a single little girl. I mean, I've never met little girls, really. Well, I've met them socially now and then. But Lolita is a figment of my imagination.
Ça va? Enchanté, ça va très bien, monsieur. Bienvenue au Montreux Palace, Bar La Rosa.
Beautiful.
Huh?
How are you?
Quiet this moment.
It's quiet, yes.
Quiet, this is the moment.
Antonio Triguero became barman of the Montreux Palace Hotel in 1968. He knew Nabokov for nearly 10 years. Some people think Nabokov was a bit of a snob, you know.
No, never. Mr. Nabokov, every day is like happy.
He was happy every day,
in his
really?
life.
Did he tip you? Did he leave a few
No.
franc? No?
No.
No tipping?
No tip.
No francs for Tony?
No tipping, but
surprised.
his presence is like the best tip.
What about Vera? What was Vera like?
But she, Mrs. Vera, I think she writes more as he, much.
Really?
Much. Because he go the butterfly.
Yeah.
In the afternoons, 3 times in the week, he play also tennis.
So you think she was writing the books
Much.
while he played tennis? Well, I haven't heard that theory
Much.
before. That's
This is
very
fantastic.
interesting. Just as important to Nabokov as his writing was butterfly hunting. He spent many hours roaming the mountains in pursuit of his winged beauties.
The highest enjoyment is when I stand among rare butterflies and their food plants. This is ecstasy, a sense of oneness with sun and stone.
Is there any connection with your writing?
There is in a general way, because I think that in a work of art, there is a kind of merging between the two things, between the precision of poetry and the excitement of pure science.
Nabokov's years in Montreux are the best documented, but in some ways the least revealing too. What he presented to the world, when he chose to appear before it at all, that is, was a mask that deliberately concealed his true feelings. Nabokov only came to Montreux in the first place because, for some reason, it reminded him of Russia, of where he grew up. And it seems I'm not going to get any nearer to solving the riddle of Nabokov and Lolita unless I go right back to the beginning. Nabokov was born into one of the richest and most powerful families in pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg. He was brought up in a household of 50 servants.
Would you ever try to go back to Russia just to have a look at it?
There's nothing to look at. New tenement houses and old churches do not interest me. The hotels there are terrible.
Check out the bed. No, it's nice.
I detest the Soviet theatre. Any palace in Italy is superior to the repainted abodes of the Tsars. As to the haunts of my childhood, well, I would not wish to spoil their images in my mind.
Summers were spent on the Nabokov's estates, some 60 miles south of the city. I'm heading to the finest of the family's properties.
Hello, ladies.
You couldn't imagine how wet and cold it was this morning, but the sun has burnt off the water and you can smell a rich Russian red clay coming up. And just take in this fantastic prairie of wheat that's been a canvas for writers and artists for generations. Gangway, arts journalist passing. Thank you very much. Hi there.
Добрый день. Hello.
Dom Nabokova.
Дом Набокова. По шоссе, под горку и сразу будет слева.
Okay, thank you.
Не за что.
This is Rajestveno, the house Nabokov inherited in 1916 at the age of 17. It's now preserved for the nation and open to the public. It looks like a sort of courthouse in the rural South in the United States. To think that this was not only owned by an aristocrat, but a teenage aristocrat at that. He inherited this plus the equivalent of $2 million from his uncle. Nabokov might not have wanted to go back to Russia, but he never forgot it.
Memory is one of the many tools that an artist uses. For instance, the freshness of the flowers being arranged by the undergardener in our cool drawing room, in the cool drawing room of our country house, as I was running downstairs with my butterfly net on a summer day half a century ago. Well, that kind of thing, of course, is absolutely permanent. No matter how many times I farm it out to my characters, it is always there with me.
Well, you don't see that every day. It's like a trap door into a secret basement.
I think it's really all a matter of love. The more you love a memory, the stronger and stranger it is.
It's amazing the place is here. And you sort of feel Nabokov's mischievous spirit about it, because it's very grand, and yet you get a little closer and bits are falling off and other bits are a bit tatty and a bit funny, and it's like there's a joke here, there's a bit of possibly black comedy cemented into the frame of the place. But the most important thing about this place is it was where Nabokov secretly met his first love. In his books, he called her Tamara.
I was a boy of 15. The lilacs were in full bloom. I had read Pushkin and Keats. I was madly in love with a girl of my age.
Danielle, hi, I'm Stephen. Hi. What I'm fascinated about is Nabokov and Tamara and what they got up to. Can you tell me about that?
They met somewhere there, down in the park.
Right.
In August of 1915. It was his first love, and this love was full.
Full. Were they keeping this secret from people?
Yes, because, well, the families, they were not socially equal, certainly, and they couldn't come to each other's homes. Nabokov's mother knew about his love, but she tried not to ask.
How important do you think it was to him in his writing, this relationship?
He started writing many poems that autumn and that winter. All these first poems were dedicated to his first love.
There was this extraordinary, world-changing event just down the block, and it found Nabokov curled up here on the chaise longue writing a poem. For a novelist, he made a pretty lousy journalist. Other people, Hemingway, say, and Orwell, would have been on the barricades turning this scene into copy. But he had thoughts only of Tamara and his sentimental feelings for her.
Однажды мы под вечер оба стояли на старом мосту. «Скажи мне, — спросил я, — до гроба запомнишь вон ласточку ту?» И ты отвечала: «Еще бы! До завтра навеки, до гроба, однажды на старом мосту».
In the new world of Bolshevik Russia, there was no place for families like the Nabokovs. They fled St. Petersburg at the end of 1917, leaving everything behind them. Nabokov would never come back, nor see his beloved Tamara again. The flames of the revolution had the effect of cauterizing Nabokov, fixing him just as he was at that time, a bit like a figure in the lava of Pompeii. And though he would never return here, Russia never really left him either. Loss, nostalgia, the need to recapture the past. These are ideas that resonate throughout Nabokov's work, even with a figure like Humbert Humbert, whose desire for Lolita is driven by the memory of a lost childhood love like Tamara.
The various novels and poems and short stories that I have written during these years, they are a kind of tribute to Russia. And I might define them as the waves and the ripples of the shock caused by the disappearance of the Russia of my childhood.
In 1919, while Nabokov's ruined family were settling in Berlin, he came to Cambridge University, his studies paid for by a string of his mother's pearls. But the time-honoured rules of Trinity College were contemptible to a young Russian aristocrat who yearned for his lost freedom. He saw himself as a fabulous exotic being from a faraway country nobody knew. His years at Cambridge would shape him as an outsider and a staunch individualist. As lovely as it is here, and it is really lovely, and it is gilded, and you think, wouldn't it be fantastic to be a fellow and to go to the Wren Library and have men in bowler hats look after you? I can see that Nabokov, after his years of privilege, doing exactly what he wanted, 50 servants, might find it constricting. Look at these gilded youth in their shorts. It's very Brideshead. I feel tempted to drink some champagne and vomit into a bowler hat like Sebastian Flight. There was one thing Nabokov could get passionate about. Soccer, he wrote in his autobiography, has remained a windswept clearing in the middle of a rather muddled period. Of course, the thing about football that everybody knows is it's a team sport. Who would have thought Nabokov, the supreme individualist, would have fitted in? But he did, because he was the goalie. Number one on his back, just as he perceived himself in life. It was perfect for him as a writer and in sport. Come on, ref! Woeful. In 1922, Nabokov joined his family in Berlin. At the time, this was the most exciting city in Europe, a place of radical politics and artistic innovation. In 1925, he married Vera Yevseyevna Slonim, a fellow Russian émigré. She would be his lifelong companion. Together they had a son, Dmitri. They lived in poverty, while Nabokov began writing dark, visionary novels in his native tongue for the small community of expatriates among whom they lived. I'm on my way to meet one famous British writer who's obsessed with Nabokov, and in particular, those Russian novels. Nabokov's early novels are saturated with his experience of exile. They're full of his yearning for Russia. And it's at this time that his famous or notorious theme begins to emerge, that of the infatuation of an older man for a much younger adolescent girl. In the case of Laughter in the Dark, a man leaves his wife for a 16-year-old and ends up murdered. Martin,
Hi.
hello.
How are you?
You've anticipated me. I was just going to come up and rattle your doorknob, as it were. How are you?
Very well, how are you?
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. Come
Great
in.
chance to talk about Nabokov.
Yeah, well, I'd say Nabokov myself.
Are you? Okay.
Well, yes, I know it's wrong, but...
It's Paris, isn't it? So I wanted to ask you about this long period that he spent. I suppose he spent a lot of his time in exile, but the years in Western Europe.
He actually had a real great streak of writing in Berlin. My three other favourite novels of his, apart from Lolita and Plin, King, Queen, Knave, Laughter in the Dark and Despair, all written in Berlin in the 30s. And for me, that is the absolute core Nabokov. I call them the black farces. They're all about adultery. They all have this king, queen, knave setup, husband, wife, intruder. If you read those novels I mentioned, you'll see that something as perverse and risky as Lolita was always going to happen.
Do you sometimes encounter people who read across from Humbert to Nabokov who are inclined to wonder about his motives and his character?
Well, I'm afraid it becomes unavoidable. In itself, Lolita is a fiercely moral book. But the little girl stuff comes up in The Enchanter, Lolita, Ada, Transparent Things, and in the new book, which I have the original of Laura. Now that's 5 books, and there are traces of it elsewhere. And I'm afraid, I think he's a very great artist indeed, but this does distort the corpus. And you wonder, I mean, the reason why this is such a crucial and difficult issue is that no one on earth sees the evil of that more clearly than Nabokov.
But once you start sort of totting it up, it does become a bit difficult to look the other way.
It's an embarrassment. You know, he liked the idea of it too much and couldn't. You know, some of writing is self-contraception, and it shouldn't stick out as it does. It's embarrassingly conspicuous in the end.
Humbert is so desperate to possess Lolita, he's even willing to kill her mother. In the end, he doesn't have to. She dies in a freak accident.
A dog and she just ran right in front of me.
Nabokov's own life, like his stories, would continue to be full of such drastic turning points.
Are you the lady's husband?
Yes.
I'm afraid she's dead.
In 1940, the writer arrived in New York. He'd been forced to flee first Berlin, then Paris, by the Nazis. The contrast of New York with the old world of Europe couldn't have been greater. You might have expected Nabokov to be slightly put off by the rampant, honest-to-goodness commercialism of the place. But actually, he loved it. I suppose after all those years of austerity in Europe, just having your plate groaning with food must have been a thrilling novelty. But he also liked the sense that everybody was open, their guard was down, they were guileless, and as a satirist and novelist he could work in that kind of area. But if you read the stuff he wrote here, he was genuinely affectionate for Americans and for them sharing their home with him.
in America, I'm happier than in any other country. It is in America that I found my best readers. I feel intellectually at home in America. Well, it is a second home in the true sense of the word.
It's a 5-hour drive to where Nabokov finally made his home in upstate New York. This great road trip would not only inspire his best-known work, but it would be reflected in it too. It is, after all, only by taking Lolita on a similar journey, away from the prying eyes of neighbours, that Humbert's finally able to seduce her.
You know, I've missed you terribly.
I haven't missed you. In fact, I've been revoltingly unfaithful to you.
On his travels, Nabokov became fascinated by the nondescript world of small-town America, the kind of places where you stop for an hour or two before moving on. He saw in it all a perfect setting for the black comedy of his art. The diner was to Nabokov what the Lake District was to Wordsworth. It was a place he went for copy. And he would spend his time in places like this, perhaps even in this diner, and Dairy Queens, motels, drive-ins, accumulating material for Lolita.
I use index cards, and I don't write, well, consecutively from the beginning to the next chapter and so on to the end. But I just sort of fill in the gaps of the picture of this jigsaw puzzle, which is quite clear in my mind, picking out a piece here and a piece there, filling out part of the sky and part of the landscape.
Looking for a place to stop for the night, I glimpse the other side of Nabokov's America. Once Humbert and Lolita's relationship takes on a sexual dimension, everything turns to despair. Our long journey, Humbert confesses, had only defiled with a sinuous trail of slime the lovely, trustful country that by then was no more than a collection of dog-eared maps, ruined tour books, and her sobs in the night. In 1948, Nabokov and Vera settled in a small college town. It would be their home for the next 10 years. Ithaca is home to Cornell, one of America's Ivy League universities. Nabokov got a job teaching Old World literature to America's young. He became well known for his eccentricity and outspoken opinions. The lectures Nabokov gave here were legendary, good enough to be published in their own right. He used to say to his English students, no talking, no smoking, no knitting, no newspaper reading, no sleeping, and for goodness sake, take notes.
I go by books, not by authors. I dislike intensely the Karamazov brothers and the ghastly Crime and Punishment rigmarole. I consider Anna Karenina the supreme masterpiece of 19th century literature. I detest resurrection.
Well, this is nice. A sort of shrine to Nabokov.
War and Peace, though a little too long, is a rollicking historical novel.
A great work of art is, of course, always original, and thus, by its very nature, should come as a more or less shocking surprise. Lolita. English department. Good sign. Hello.
Hello.
I'm Stephen Smith. I'm looking for Nabokov's old office.
I am Ken McLean, and you are here.
Fantastic. This is the spot.
This is it.
How exciting. And this is yours now, is it?
I am the temporary custodian.
Well, that's
yes.
a treat and a thrill, isn't it? Did he carve his initials or leave some gum or anything like that?
Sadly, there is literally nothing about this office, I'm afraid, that isn't generic.
Yeah.
What is probably more interesting is the fact that at least once or twice a year, someone stops by.
Really?
And
like
does
me.
pretty much what you did.
Yeah.
And for me, it's an amazing thing because he or she will come in, they'll look around, and then often they'll just break into tears.
Really?
And they'll just say, this is the place where the great man was.
When he wasn't teaching, Nabokov was working on his masterpiece at home in one of the tree-lined streets popular with the university crowd. It's Sunday afternoon, it's got that right kind of Lolita feeling. A lazy, muggy weekend, with a slight sense of threat and danger in the air. This looks like Everywhereville, USA. It's picket fences and clapboard, occasional dog in the yard. But it's here, in this landscape, where Lolita was born, specifically at this house. This must be it, 802 Seneca Street. I haven't been able to get hold of the current occupants by phone, so it's not at all certain I'll get to see what I'm looking for. Hello, I'm sorry to bother you on a Sunday. I'm a big fan of Nabokov, who lived here. I know it's very inconvenient. Could I have a look round, or could I at least see if there's still the incinerator in the garden where they thought about burning the book?
Oh, in the back?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way around.
Round this side? Even as Nabokov finished Lolita, he was filled with doubt because of its troubling content. Well, on this site, more than likely, Nabokov's wife twice rescued the manuscript of Lolita from the flames. It's not actually the old incinerator anymore, it's a barbecue. But there's I'm getting a strong folk memory of that great near miss of literature, the non-burning of Lolita. Back at the university, I have a unique opportunity to get closer to Nabokov the man.
How do you do?
I'm Stephen. How are you?
Hi, Stephen.
Great to meet you. Thanks for coming to see me.
No, it's something I'm delighted to do, and I'm glad you're doing Nabokov. He was an important man.
At 97, Mike Abrams is one of the few people alive who knew Nabokov intimately. He's also one of America's foremost literary scholars in his own right. So, how far are we going back? You knew Nabokov, you
when
knew
he first arrived. I arrived at Cornell in 1945. He arrived, what was it, 47, 48?
And what were you doing here? Why were you?
I came as a professor of English, an assistant professor of English. I was a young beginner then.
Had you heard of him before you met him?
He was a name to me, and I'd seen one or two of his pieces in the New Yorker. But I didn't realize that at the time, who did, except Vladimir himself, who realized this, of course, from the beginning, that he would end up next to Joyce and Proust in the history of the novel, a major innovative figure.
That sense of sort of impregnable confidence that he had could have made him a rather obnoxious fellow to be around. Was he like that?
Not at all. He was basically a very kindly man who didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. He was very careful about that.
Lolita was meteoric, but also scandalous. I mean, was there any of that sense going on around here?
It is true that he inclined to these outre subjects. They interested him in a novel as a creative writer might be interested. But when you finish it and come back, you find that though it's that kind of subject that appealed to him, normatively, it's a humane treatment of that subject and essentially a moral book when it's finished. It's not sensationalistic in any way.
I'm overnighting in Ithaca before the long drive back to New York. looking around the landscape of suburban America. It's a reminder of how far Nabokov had come since his childhood. If you look at Nabokov as he was in Russia, he was actually a romantic, a sentimentalist. And perhaps he knew that love being so strong and powerful, there couldn't be a more interesting or dark theme than the corruption of love, the absolute perversion of love, which is what Lolita is about. Humbert's fling with Lolita is all too brief for him. She soon runs away with another older man. When Humbert finds her again, now aged 17, she's pregnant.
Oh, come on, now don't cry. I'm sorry. Try to understand. I'm really sorry that I cheated so much.
In indulging his obsession with Lolita's beauty and innocence, Humbert has destroyed those very qualities. Nabokov ensures he pays for his sins.
Hey, well listen, let's keep in touch, huh? I'll write you when we get to Alaska.
Losing Lolita won't be the only price Humbert will pay. Nabokov wrote a screenplay that Kubrick's film is based on, but it's not absolutely faithful. He manages to give himself a nice cameo as a butterfly collector, Vladimir Nabokov, who Humbert bumps into. By introducing himself as a character, Nabokov may have been demonstrating, once and for all, that he and Humbert were not the same man.
I tried to express as nearest to my vision of the world as I could. If the word cruel, I suppose it just means that I saw the world as cruel in those days. But I don't think that there's a especially perverse or cruel streak in my writing. In life, I'm a mild old gentleman. I'm very kind.
Before I leave New York, I have an appointment at the offices of Nabokov's favourite magazine. Playboy is publishing an extract from the original of Laura, the book Nabokov left unfinished when he died in 1977, and which his son Dmitri is publishing against his father's dying wishes. This book has much in common with Lolita, even including a character called not Humbert Humbert, but Hubert Hubert. Wow. Oh, look at that, that's good. A whole stack, a raft, a survival float of Playboys. What a valuable resource and cultural artefact that is. Hello Amy, I'm Stephen.
Hi,
How nice
Stephen.
to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too.
Thank you for having me at Playboy Mansions. Is this the mansion?
I wish it were the mansion. I don't see any.
Do I get to meet Hef himself and maybe share a tub of some sort with him?
I think he's still asleep.
Is he? Yeah, he needs his rest.
He does.
He's quite an old guy now.
Yes, he is. He is.
Well, how did you hear about the book? Or maybe you knew of old about Laura?
I knew a little bit about it. I knew it was out there, and I knew there was a debate going on about whether or not Dmitri should publish it or destroy it.
One theory about the reason that he wanted it destroyed was that it was too shocking, if you like. It was kind of Lolita plus.
Yeah. Certainly there's a moment where they discuss how such an enormous man would have sex with his wife, who of course is not faithful to him.
I believe it describes positions.
But I believe you could find that on Oprah.
Yeah, you could find it in your magazine,
well,
I
that's
suspect.
True too.
Yes. What is the connection with Lolita?
Certainly a playing with identity, great discussion of sexuality and sensuality, both how one might profit from it and how it's harmful. I think, again, the sense that he's testing convention.
There's a danger, or perhaps it's not a danger, but that some people will say, well, that's Nabokov for you, you know.
Yeah.
It's what we would perhaps say in the UK, well, he was a dirty old man, or his preoccupation, some people might say that, once again, talking about sex involving underage girls.
When we did this tribute to Lolita, we got lots of angry letters.
Did you?
For paying tribute to it.
Well, actually, it's not particularly a dirty book. If that's what you're looking for,
and even,
you will be quite shortchanged, I suspect.
And I think in the original of Laura as well, Nabokov, there's a kind of anti-sex quality as well, making sex unsexy. He's a sensualist, but then there's also all the problems and
the sort of black comedy of...
Yes, and in the interview that he did with us, he said, oh, let us not talk of sex, you know, because it's so loaded, it's so complicated, and it's so boring, depending, right? So I think he well knew what he was doing, and I think if you read him carefully, gosh, what richness. But you see, he had a lot more on his mind than titillating you, because it's not all that titillating.
No.
No, you may be that I've not slept very well, but you're beginning to look a little like Nabokov.
Am I?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
I don't know
Have you got
either.
your checkbook handy while you're in that mood? Yes, maybe so. A poet of sexual taboos, uninterested in sex itself, a nostalgic émigré with no desire to go home. The contradictions in Nabokov's life and books are seemingly endless. To try and resolve them, I've come back to where I started. Just outside Montreux is the Musée Cantonal de Zoologie. And this is where the work of Nabokov's lifetime, his other great work, is hidden away. But it's absolutely vital to understanding the man and the work we're more familiar with. During all the years Nabokov was writing, he was also acquiring an international reputation in the world of science. These are just 8 of the 43 cases in Nabokov's collection of more than 4,000 butterflies. Is it just an amateur's hobby, or is this a proper scientific collection of butterflies?
No, you have to consider this collection as a true scientific collection. I mean, Vladimir Nabokov was a good entomologist. The butterflies he collected were always the most difficult to identify. Those which are quite easy to identify, they are just missing in the collections. And Nabokov was definitely a good catcher.
What do you think the butterflies meant to him? Because he spent so much of his time, when he wasn't writing, he was after these beauties here, wasn't he?
Yeah. Butterflies are everywhere in Nabokov's writing. One of my explanations is probably was very impressed by the life of the butterfly. I mean, to begin like a caterpillar, to go through an immobile stage, naiad, nymph, nymphal stage.
A nymph stage?
A nymph stage.
That's quite suggestive,
yes, exactly.
Even there, isn't it?
Yeah.
The nymph stage of a butterfly.
Exactly. And then, after a couple of weeks, you get a completely different insect with wings and colors.
And very beautiful, and it goes from something rather ugly and plain to great beauty. Nabokov claimed the happiest moment of his life was the day he discovered a new species.
I found it and I named it, being versed in taxonomic Latin. Thus became godfather to an insect and its first describer, and I want no other fame. Wide open on its pin, though fast asleep, and safe from creeping relatives and rust, in this secluded stronghold where we keep type specimens It will transcend its dust.
As if it wasn't enough to be allowed to see this absolutely crucial part of Nabokov's life, his butterfly collection, which is rarely shown and put out to the public. It's a lovely Nabokovian touch to be looking at them in this room surrounded by skeletons of apes and humans, which begs the question of the missing link. Where is the missing link to go into the skeleton collection? And is this the missing link to understanding our writer? I suspect it is. Ever since being banished from the paradise of his childhood, Nabokov's obsession was with fleeting beauty and how to recapture it. In Lolita, he created a morality tale about a man who goes about this the wrong way. Humbert hunts down his rival, the man who stole Lolita from him, in a jealous rage. What had started with illicit desire and obsession ends in cold murder.
Oh, that hurts!
I set out on this journey unsettled by Nabokov's cruel tongue and the way he returned repeatedly to the theme of desire for young girls. I do believe that in the end he was a hardened sentimentalist, a man who through repeated hard knocks himself had learnt to conceal his true feelings, but a humanitarian nonetheless. A man who deliberately set out to provoke and test society over its dearest principles. In his obsession with Lolita, Humbert commits any number of crimes, up to and including the murder of a rival. The book ends with him completing his prison memoir of the affair as he's waiting to stand trial. And there's one absolutely crucial moment of insight, of remorse. It's when Humbert is recounting walking in a strange town on a hill and the sound of children's laughter and play coming to him. And he writes, "Then I knew that the hopelessly poignant thing was not Lolita's absence from my side, but the absence of her voice from that concord." And it's at that moment that he realizes finally what he's done. He's corrupted Lolita, a 12-year-old. He's stolen her childhood. And if there is an issue about the rights and wrongs of this book and of its author, this surely gets Nabokov off the hook.
I really believe that one day a reappraiser will come and declare that far from being a frivolous firebird, I was a rigid moralist, kicking sin, cuffing stupidity, ridiculing the vulgar and the cruel, and assigning sovereign power to tenderness, talent, pride.